The recent life sentence handed down to Corey Harrison, the son of Rick Harrison, famed star of the popular reality series Pawn Stars, has left the public in disbelief. The case has sparked deep concerns about the hidden realities lurking behind the glamorous facade of television stardom. Once celebrated as a key figure in the beloved pawnshop family spotlighted on American television, Corey's dramatic fall from grace has done more than just damage the family's public image. It has uncovered a web of tension, secrecy, and deep-rooted fractures within what many believe to be an indestructible dynasty. What was once a beacon of business brilliance and television success, the Harrison name, has now become tainted with scandal, serious criminal allegations, and the betrayal of millions who once placed their trust in them. If this story resonates with you, and you believe in holding public figures accountable, hit that like button and share this message. A simple action on your part can help shine a light on issues of integrity in the entertainment world, pushing for more transparency not only from the producers behind the scenes, but also from the very fans who support these figures. At the age of 41, Corey Harrison had grown into a familiar and likable presence on American TV. His genuine demeanor and approachable attitude made him immensely popular with viewers. He was seen as a living testament to the American dream, climbing the ladder within the family business and reaching national fame. But beneath that seemingly relatable charm lay a disturbing narrative of criminal behavior that extended far beyond the doors of the pawn shop. The very enterprise that propelled the Harrisons to stardom had been concealing a sinister reality, one they worked diligently to keep hidden. Yet, when the FBI began their investigation, it became impossible to hide the truth any longer. Over the course of several months, federal investigators gathered substantial evidence in secret. Their findings pointed directly to Rick Harrison, the family patriarch, who was allegedly involved in a variety of unlawful activities, including money laundering and even human trafficking. These serious accusations instantly dismantled the polished image of the Harrison clan. Once heralded as diligent and authentic business people, their name was now irrevocably stained. But perhaps the most jaw-dropping detail was this: Corey Harrison wasn't just an onlooker. He played an active and pivotal role in the illegal operations. He wasn't merely riding the coattails of success. He was helping to construct an empire that thrived not only on antiques, but also on criminal ventures. As federal authorities expanded their investigation, the public's fascination with the Harrisons took a dark and unexpected twist. Longtime fans of Pawn Stars were stunned to witness their favorite television personalities being implicated in a far-reaching criminal operation. The scope of the case crossed state borders and led to the discovery of a clandestine world of illegal activity that few had ever suspected. As investigators dug deeper, Corey's role in the conspiracy became undeniable. Testimonies from key witnesses and reams of financial documentation directly implicated him in numerous illicit deals. Many of these activities were cleverly disguised through the family pawn shop, which operated as a front for their crimes. The investigation reached a turning point when federal agents raided Rick Harrison's lavish Las Vegas estate. Inside, they uncovered encrypted electronic devices and confidential financial records that conclusively linked the family to a sprawling network of criminal enterprises. As the evidence piled up, it became impossible to view the pawn shop simply as a quirky family business. It was now exposed as a cover for a sophisticated and well-organized criminal syndicate. The news sent shockwaves through communities nationwide. How could the beloved face of Pawn Stars be connected to such appalling conduct? As the case gained momentum, the narrative around Corey Harrison shifted dramatically. The once adored reality TV personality was now facing the full weight of his actions. The evidence left little room for doubt. From the dramatic FBI raid to the damning testimonies, from detailed financial records to digital communications, every piece pointed toward Corey's direct involvement in a high-level criminal enterprise. It wasn't just circumstantial, it was irrefutable. In the courtroom, Corey Harrison stood accused of collaborating with his father to maintain a criminal operation hidden beneath the veneer of a family-run business. The trial unfolded like something out of a suspense thriller. As the defense struggled to combat the mountain of damning evidence, one truth became clear. Corey was not an innocent bystander. He was deeply involved. He wasn't manipulated into participation. He was a vital cog in the machine. Prosecutors outlined the extent of his actions, constructing a devastating portrayal of his culpability. However, as more details emerged, The public began to question what truly led Corey into such a dark place. Was he motivated by greed and the lure of an easy fortune? Or was Rick Harrison the puppeteer, using his influence over Corey to ensnare him in a long-running scheme of lies and deceit? The line between victim and perpetrator blurred as the complex relationship between father and son was brought into the spotlight. After weeks of emotional testimonies, the jury rendered its final decision. Corey Harrison was found guilty on numerous charges connected to the sprawling criminal operation. The punishment was harsh and irreversible, a life sentence without the possibility of parole. A man who once symbolized success and relatability on American television would now spend the rest of his life behind bars, marked forever by the choices he made. The sentencing signaled a dramatic shift in the legacy of the Harrison family. What had once stood as a proud representation of American entrepreneurial spirit and cultural pride had transformed into a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of the destructive power of fame, greed, and concealed truths. Fans who once eagerly tuned in to watch Corey now grapple with difficult questions. How did someone so seemingly genuine become entangled in such darkness? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, how much did Rick Harrison actually know? Was he the true mastermind, while Corey paid the ultimate price? As news of the verdict continued to circulate, public opinion turned swift and unforgiving. The revelations surrounding Corey Harrison's conviction left fans stunned, many of whom felt deeply betrayed by a family they had once admired and trusted. Social media quickly erupted with disbelief, flooded by messages from viewers struggling to comprehend how such a seemingly genuine group of hardworking entrepreneurs could have been running a sophisticated web of criminal activity. Questions swirled around how such a deception could have continued for so long. This wasn't just a family scandal. It became a harsh lesson on how fragile reputations can be and how devastating the truth can feel when it finally surfaces. The downfall of Corey Harrison serves as a powerful and cautionary tale. It underscores the razor-thin divide between the public's perception and an individual's hidden truth. It highlights how the consequences of unethical choices and the shadows cast by fame can take on lives of their own. But perhaps most tragically, it's also a story of squandered redemption. A man who once stood atop an empire, only to be brought down by the very foundation that had once raised him up. There is painful irony in the fact that the legacy Corey helped construct ultimately became the reason his future was destroyed. The foundation of that empire was not built overnight. It emerged from years of small trades, one deal at a time, with success slowly and carefully amassed. Yet, in the world of fame, where fortune can be both seductive and fleeting, just a single moment in the spotlight can permanently alter one's destiny. At the center of this vast empire stands Rick Harrison, the father, the founder, and arguably the orchestrator of everything, light and dark. Known for his sharp mind and confident presence, he became a household name as the star of the Pawn Stars series, set in his gold and silver pawn shop. The History Channel's Pawn Stars, which made its debut in 2009, became a television sensation almost overnight. What began as a modest pawn business in the heart of Las Vegas quickly turned into a global phenomenon. Viewers from around the world tuned in to witness Rick, Corey, and their crew examine rare antiques, unusual collectibles, and historical treasures. However, behind the production lights and scripted scenes, a darker reality was steadily taking shape, one that would ultimately lead to the destruction of the Harrison family name. Rick Harrison's journey to fame and fortune was far from easy. Born in Lexington, North Carolina, his early life was shaped by financial instability. As the son of a military man, his childhood was marked by frequent relocations. By his teenage years, he had settled in Las Vegas, where he entered the pawn business and started learning the trade, buying, selling, and appraising various items. His dedication led him to open his own shop in 1989, fulfilling a long-held dream. But it was in 2009, with the launch of Pawn Stars, that his fortunes changed forever. The show's blend of humor, history, and everyday business gave the Harrisons celebrity status. It turned Rick Harrison into a bona fide television star and made his son Corey a familiar face across American households. Corey, often seen as the more grounded counterpart to his father's bold personality, clearly inherited his business instincts. Together, They were portrayed as a family of honest entrepreneurs building a legacy from humble beginnings. But behind the smiling faces and entertaining banter lay a disturbing truth the cameras never captured. As Pawn Stars grew in popularity, so did the Harrisons' influence and their bank accounts. Rick Harrison, once living modestly, was now residing in a luxury mansion located in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Las Vegas. Corey, too, rose to prominence. No longer just the heir to a successful shop, he had become a central figure in running daily operations and negotiating high-value deals that contributed to the show's ongoing success. But as his influence expanded, so too did the presence of dubious figures entering the Harrisons' inner circle. The pawn shop, which once dealt with modest items, soon found itself involved in high-stakes transactions. Rare historical objects, valuable celebrity memorabilia, priceless art. These deals were often worth millions. While some customers were genuine, others saw the business as the perfect vehicle to launder money or move illicit goods. The temptation of easy profits and unchecked fame opened the door for corruption. And it was during this period that Rick and Corey reportedly forged ties with criminal organizations. As these shady deals became more frequent, the distinction between legitimate business and unlawful enterprise began to blur. The attention of law enforcement was eventually drawn to the increasingly suspicious nature of the shop's operations. By 2012, federal authorities had launched a discreet investigation into the Harrison family. The primary focus: suspicions of money laundering and trafficking in stolen merchandise. The investigation took time, but slowly, the scale of the illegal operations was exposed. What once seemed like an innocent family-run business had allegedly evolved into a cover for underground criminal dealings. According to investigators, the pawn shop had become a hub for illicit transactions, ranging from stolen art to unregistered firearms. Corey Harrison, who once thrived under the bright lights of fame, was now entangled in a menacing network of criminality. This world, hidden behind reality television glamour, was on the verge of pulling his entire family under. Despite growing suspicions, the Harrisons maintained a well-polished public image. To viewers, they remained the embodiment of grit and perseverance. But behind closed doors, evidence was piling up, painting a much darker picture. It became clear that they were not just running a business. They were allegedly managing a vast criminal organization. Allegations suggested that the Harrison family was deeply involved in laundering money through suspiciously high-value transactions. Authorities also believed that they played a key role in transporting stolen goods across state lines. The TV show that once seemed like harmless entertainment was now being reconsidered through a much more sinister lens. Corey Harrison, the once beloved reality star, found himself at the heart of a growing federal case. The investigation intensified, with agents uncovering communications, financial records, and encrypted files that pointed directly to Corey's involvement. He wasn't just an accessory. He was a key player, heavily involved in managing and executing the illegal operations from within. While Rick Harrison served as the public figure of the business, it was Corey Harrison who handled the coordination behind closed doors. He operated as the key link between the illicit networks and the seemingly legitimate pawn shop. Individuals involved in questionable dealings were frequently seen entering the premises. The deeper federal investigators delved into the matter, the more apparent it became that the Harrison dynasty was built on far more than just rare collectibles. Behind the facade of historical treasures lay a web of high-stakes illegal dealings. Both Rick and Corey were heavily entangled in the illicit operations. The once celebrated father-son pair who had become household names for their charm and wit were now facing a devastating public unraveling. The very image that once propelled them to stardom was now becoming their downfall. The fame that brought admiration now turned into intense scrutiny and disgrace. Once a fan favorite on national television, Corey Harrison was no longer seen as the likable heir to the pawn shop empire. He had transformed into a critical player in an underground network of crime and corruption. No longer a background assistant, Corey had taken on a decision-making role in these illegal dealings, one that would soon be thrust into the spotlight. As their wealth and popularity escalated, so did public suspicion. What began as a modest family venture in Las Vegas had ballooned into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. However, with that rapid growth came the watchful eye of federal authorities. The FBI, always alert to criminal undertakings hidden beneath the surface of legitimate operations, turned its attention to the thriving empire created by the Pawn Stars brand. Over the course of 16 months, their findings would shatter the carefully maintained image the Harrisons had built. The FBI's initial probe began with a standard financial audit that uncovered a pattern of transactions too suspicious to ignore. What seemed like typical sales involving antiques and collectibles quickly raised red flags. Beneath the glamour of reality television's staged negotiations over rare goods, agents found signs of systematic illegal conduct. The investigation began quietly, with officials combing through financial ledgers and backroom dealings at the gold and silver pawn shop. At first, suspicions centered around money laundering and the distribution of stolen merchandise. But as the inquiry evolved, it revealed a deeply embedded criminal framework. More evidence emerged, indicating that the business was not simply being mismanaged. It had become a hotbed for illegal enterprise. A shadowy underworld was uncovered beneath the gleaming brand that had gained global popularity. What started as a case involving irregular accounting rapidly escalated into a full-scale investigation into organized crime. The shop had become a hub for countless unlawful transactions, and the FBI was closing in fast. One of the first alarming discoveries was a series of substantial cash deposits into the store's accounts, with no accompanying documentation. While the pawn industry often handles cash, the scale of these deposits far exceeded what was typical, even for high-value items. Investigators were troubled by the lack of corresponding records. Transactions involving valuables worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were unaccounted for. These discrepancies were too significant to overlook. In addition to the oversized cash dealings, many exchanges took place without formal receipts or required documentation. This directly violated federal regulations and raised alarm bells. Several high-priced items were also transported across state lines, with no clear provenance or paper trail, suggesting the goods may have been stolen. These weren't harmless clerical oversights. The FBI believed they were deliberate acts designed to obscure the origin of illegal assets. The mounting evidence pointed to systemic fraud and manipulation. These findings triggered the involvement of multiple law enforcement agencies at both the federal and local levels. As more details surfaced, the idea that these issues stemmed from incompetence or accidental mismanagement quickly dissolved. The puzzle pieces started to form a more disturbing picture. The FBI discovered that Rick Harrison had conducted business with known figures tied to organized crime, individuals associated with money laundering and weapons smuggling. The shop had been converted into a facade for criminal operations. Whether he realized it fully or not, Rick was acting as a key facilitator within this network. As the investigation advanced, attention turned increasingly toward Corey Harrison, whose influence had grown alongside the shop's expansion. Although Rick remained the face of the business, it was Corey who ran day-to-day operations from behind the curtain. Federal officials determined that Corey was not merely managing the business. He was an integral part of orchestrating its darker dealings. He liaised with criminal entities, ensuring that illegal trades were carried out smoothly. The idea that Corey was just a passive inheritor was now completely dispelled. He had become a central figure within the criminal architecture. Matters escalated further when investigators stumbled upon a startling development. Evidence surfaced suggesting a link between the pawn shop and human trafficking operations. Following the money trail, agents found that the store was being used as a financial conduit for stolen goods and, more alarmingly, to process payments tied to trafficking activities that extended across state lines. This revelation heightened the case's urgency and significantly raised the stakes. For months, the FBI worked silently, but persistently. They utilized covert surveillance methods, intercepted private communications, and collected encrypted messages. These contained detailed plans and references to secretive transactions involving the Harrisons and organized crime syndicates nationwide. The gold and silver pawn shop had evolved into more than a quirky tourist attraction. It was now the epicenter of a deeply rooted criminal web. One of the more astonishing elements to surface involved the employees themselves. While most of the staff remained loyal to the Harrison family, a few began to question the ethical gray areas they witnessed. These workers observed unusual dealings, massive cash payments for items with no clear background, merchandise that seemed to disappear without a trace, and customers who were anything but ordinary. These whistleblowers quietly came forward, offering crucial insights that strengthened the case against the family. Thanks to these internal revelations, federal agents developed a much clearer understanding of the internal operations. Yet the Harrisons maintained their public image, continuing to appear on television with the same energy and enthusiasm. The show filmed new episodes, and their fans remained unaware of the brewing storm. But beneath the polished production and smiling faces, the FBI's case was solidifying. More leads surfaced as connections were traced, and the broader picture became increasingly grim. The investigation revealed that the Harrisons were not merely caught in the web of organized crime. They were woven into its very fabric. They weren't accidental bystanders, they were willful participants, orchestrating some of the illegal dealings themselves. For nearly a year and a half, federal agents raced to gather sufficient proof while ensuring that critical evidence wasn't destroyed. At last, they reached the tipping point. With every puzzle piece in place, the authorities were ready to strike. The extent of the Harrisons' criminal operations was finally understood. It turned out to be one of the most elaborate money laundering schemes in Las Vegas history, cleverly hidden in plain sight under the guise of a successful pawn business. Investigators discovered that the Harrisons had cycled millions of dollars through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell corporations. This final discovery sent shockwaves through the case. It became undeniable that the Harrison family empire wasn't built on just ambition and charm, but also on deceit, manipulation, and a foundation of deep-rooted corruption. With this vital intelligence in hand, the FBI was finally prepared to take action. The lengthy investigation had reached its boiling point, and it was time for the Harrisons to answer for their alleged misdeeds. What began as a quiet probe into suspicious financial dealings had now escalated into a full-blown criminal investigation that would upend the lives of Rick and Corey Harrison forever. The summer of 2025 marked a defining moment in the case against Rick Harrison's pawn shop empire and the illicit activities it allegedly concealed. After extensive months filled with covert surveillance, meticulous financial audits, and testimonies from multiple witnesses, the FBI zeroed in on the moment of truth. Authorities carried out a high-stakes raid on Rick Harrison's opulent Las Vegas estate, an operation destined to reveal the full scale of the criminal underbelly hiding behind the celebrity image. Rick Harrison's lavish mansion was far more than a place to live. It stood as a monument to his supposed success and legacy. Nestled within one of Las Vegas's most elite neighborhoods, the sprawling home was a masterpiece of design and elegance. Every corner, from its marble floors to its sweeping city views, was a testament to the American dream, a symbol of achievement and relentless drive. But to the FBI, it had become something far more sinister, the operational hub of a hidden crime network. For several months, federal agents had been assembling a case against the Harrison family. They scrutinized financial transactions, decoded encrypted communications, and even went undercover to expose what truly transpired behind the gold and silver pawn shop's well-polished counters. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. The pawn shop, a beloved institution made famous by reality TV, had allegedly become a central player in a complex web of illegal operations, including money laundering, trafficking of stolen property, and even connections to human trafficking. Both Rick and Corey Harrison, along with several collaborators, were allegedly knee-deep in illicit affairs. These transactions weren't isolated events. They stretched across state lines and were entangled with larger organized crime networks. The raid on Rick's mansion had been the culmination of months of preparation. Equipped with search warrants, surveillance recordings, and overwhelming evidence, the agents were ready to breach what had long been a fortress of secrecy. It was early in the morning when federal agents descended on the estate with military-level coordination. The house, though tranquil at the time, quickly became the epicenter of a calculated strike. SWAT teams and FBI operatives sealed off the perimeter, ensuring there would be no escape and no chance for evidence to be destroyed. This was a zero-failure mission, executed with precision. While the public had long been enchanted by the glamour of the Harrisons' lives, the reality uncovered that day painted a far darker picture. The mansion's luxurious features, its chandeliers, wine cellars, and grand hallways, hid something far more incriminating. It was the basement and hidden office spaces that proved crucial. These secluded areas, shielded by elegant decor, contained the proof that agents had been hoping to find. Within these secret chambers, agents recovered a treasure trove of encrypted electronics, laptops, hard drives, and smartphones that both Rick and Corey had reportedly used to orchestrate illegal deals. These devices contained detailed ledgers, communication logs, and email threads that linked the Harrisons directly to various criminal entities. Also found were stacks of classified documents outlining financial maneuvers that funneled millions of dollars in unexplained cash, far beyond the means of any standard pawn shop. The most shocking revelation came from a locked chamber hidden beneath the wine cellar. Behind the seemingly innocent setting, agents discovered documents outlining operations that extended beyond monetary crimes. Files hinted at the trafficking of individuals, coordinated transportation of contraband, and financial records that tied the Harrisons to a sprawling underground network. These revelations reshaped the entire narrative, proving that the family wasn't merely facilitating shady deals. They were deeply entrenched in multiple layers of criminality. The evidence unearthed linked the family to international arms dealers and major organized crime rings. What had once been celebrated as a historic American success story had now been exposed as the backbone of a far-reaching and sinister enterprise. The raid didn't stop at Rick's mansion. Simultaneously, federal teams struck other properties connected to the Harrisons. These included additional homes, commercial buildings, and storage units suspected of harboring more evidence of criminal activity. Each location offered new layers of insight. The agents uncovered how these venues were used to disguise illicit transactions. Their coordinated approach ensured no critical piece of evidence would be lost or tampered with, giving the investigation the upper hand in a legal battle that was quickly escalating. Among the many disturbing findings were records confirming that the pawn shop had been selling stolen antiques and valuable artifacts without conducting proper background checks. These weren't just harmless trinkets. Some of the items were suspected to have originated from private collections, museums, and vulnerable individuals who were deceived into parting with their treasured possessions. The Harrisons had allegedly taken advantage of their position of trust, exploiting their clientele while building a fortune not just on business savvy, but through criminal exploitation. As news of the raid spread, disbelief gripped the loyal fan base of Pawn Stars. Viewers who had spent years watching the Harrisons' every move, admiring their sharp wit and bargaining prowess, now found themselves confronted with a deeply unsettling truth. The beloved television personalities were facing grave accusations. The family, once seen as relatable and hardworking, was now alleged to be the architects of a criminal empire. As the dust settled, hundreds of pieces of evidence had been confiscated. These materials would become central to the prosecution's case against the Harrisons. This scandal not only implicated Rick and Corey, but stained the entire legacy of Pawn Stars. The betrayal ran deep for fans who had emotionally invested in the show, who had come to see the Harrisons as symbols of honest business and American resilience. Now, that illusion had shattered. Following the operation, authorities swiftly moved in to apprehend Rick Harrison, Corey Harrison, and multiple alleged co-conspirators. Their arrests marked the collapse of what was once a celebrated family-run business, now exposed as the facade for an elaborate criminal syndicate. The investigation was far from over, but the arrests signaled a pivotal victory for law enforcement. As the inquiry intensified, new and even more damning details began to emerge. The Harrisons, once applauded for their hustle and charisma, were now facing the cold reality of legal prosecution. The empire they had spent years building on screen was now at risk of being dismantled in courtrooms and prison cells. And through it all, one overwhelming question loomed. What was the true role of Corey Harrison, the once lovable son and heir to the pawn shop legacy? A figure once portrayed as lighthearted, sincere, and easy to connect with had now become the subject of intense scrutiny. The public was left wondering just how much of Corey's image was a performance, and how much was a mask hiding the reality of a man deeply enmeshed in one of the largest criminal scandals Las Vegas had ever seen. If you believe in upholding integrity and demanding accountability within the entertainment world, make sure to like and share this post. Your engagement goes a long way. It raises awareness and reinforces a collective stand against deception and unethical practices. Be a voice in the movement to reshape how reality television affects society. That one click, that one share, might be the spark that inspires a more conscious and morally grounded community. Behind the cameras, however, Corey Harrison's actions told a story vastly different from the polished persona shown on TV. From a young age, Corey immersed himself in the family-run pawn shop, learning every aspect of the trade under the watchful eye of his father, Rick Harrison. He soon became a cornerstone of the shop's operation and a familiar face to viewers of Pawn Stars. Known for striking deals and assessing rare items, Corey appeared as a smart, relatable businessman with a knack for negotiation. As time passed and the show's popularity soared, Corey's responsibilities broadened. So did the scope of his involvement. The boundary between legitimate business practices and illicit dealings began to dissolve. While Rick remained the charismatic frontman of the Pawn Stars empire, Corey quietly stepped into a more pivotal role behind closed doors. Increasingly, high-profile individuals started frequenting the shop, not for pawn transactions, but for reasons far more nefarious. Many of these visitors had direct links to organized crime syndicates, leveraging the shop as a discreet location to launder money, traffic stolen goods, and broker under-the-table deals, activities that could be conveniently masked by the show's filming. It was within this secretive environment that Corey's descent into the world of crime began to unfold. Though the show painted him as a stand-up businessman, courtroom testimony and mounting evidence revealed a much darker truth. Corey wasn't just involved, he orchestrated many of the illegal undertakings. He wasn't merely the son of a celebrity entrepreneur. He was a major figure in a sophisticated criminal web that spanned stolen merchandise, financial crime, and disturbingly, human trafficking. The FBI's investigation disclosed that Corey had become the go-to liaison for several criminal networks that used the shop as a hub. While Rick provided the public-facing persona, Corey managed the operational logistics. From coordinating large transactions to discreetly moving goods and handling illicit payments. His actions weren't passive or incidental. He played a deliberate and proactive role, ensuring that these transactions appeared clean while hiding their unlawful nature. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from digital devices seized during the dramatic FBI raid on the Harrison estate. Among the data retrieved were encrypted messages, emails, and digital correspondence that directly implicated Corey in a long list of illegal exchanges. The communication logs painted a portrait of someone deeply entrenched in the criminal ecosystem, negotiating with gangs, giving explicit instructions for laundering operations, and discussing the careful movement of high-value stolen items. As the gold and silver pawn shop expanded, so did the criminal operations hiding within it. Among the most horrifying findings was Corey's active participation in human trafficking. The store that once claimed to celebrate history and heirlooms was, in reality, a veil for much darker activity. Agents discovered irrefutable proof that Corey helped facilitate the trade of human lives, coordinating the movement and sale of women and minors for both forced labor and sexual exploitation. These revelations rocked the investigation and redefined the scope of the case. Corey, the once charismatic figure from television, was now exposed as a willing participant in unimaginable crimes. Many victims had been lured in under false pretenses, believing they were entering legitimate transactions, only to find themselves trapped in a horrific network of exploitation. His role in such atrocities obliterated any perception of innocence he once held in the eyes of the public. The carefully curated image of the Harrison family crumbled in real time as the investigation unfolded. Their illegal acts were not random. They were pieces of a vast organized criminal empire. Corey's hands weren't just dirty. They were soaked in the consequences of decisions that destroyed lives and betrayed the trust of millions of fans. His reputation as a dedicated businessman was a facade masking a far darker identity, one rooted in greed and manipulation. The mounting evidence presented by the FBI offered a brutal reality. Corey had chosen to embrace the shadows of the business. He wasn't just facilitating crimes, he was engineering them. He helped launder vast sums of money, coordinated the transfer of stolen artifacts, and provided cover for some of the world's most heinous criminals. His actions made him a pillar within this underground operation. In addition to overseeing illicit dealings, Corey managed the pawn shop's relationships with their criminal clientele. These weren't average customers hoping to pawn off antiques. They were smugglers, traffickers, and gang affiliates who saw the pawn shop as the perfect laundering vehicle. Corey acted as the middleman, connecting them to the Harrison network and helping them operate under the radar of law enforcement. He had become an indispensable figure in the criminal underground. His trustworthiness among organized crime factions was not accidental. It was earned through years of deliberate participation and facilitation. As the legal case against him progressed, the depth of his involvement became more obvious. He wasn't dragged into the business unwillingly. He was actively invested in its darkest corners. The courtroom became the stage for the fall of a once celebrated TV star. As Corey Harrison's trial commenced, every seat was filled. Reporters, curious onlookers, and even family members watching in stunned silence. The nation had tuned in to watch Corey negotiate over comic books and Civil War relics. Now, they watched as his entire empire unraveled. He was no longer the affable heir of a pawnshop legacy. He was now a man on trial for crimes that shattered lives and violated every ethical boundary. The prosecution laid out its case with chilling precision. Their portrayal of Corey left little doubt. He had repeatedly and deliberately broken the law for personal gain. The evidence stacked against him, digital records, witness accounts, transaction histories, made it nearly impossible for his defense to create doubt. The man who once represented family, tradition, and business savvy had become a symbol of deceit, corruption, and criminal betrayal. As the trial moved forward, the public saw a dramatic shift in perception. Corey was no longer the humorous sidekick of Pawn stars. He was the architect of his own downfall, a central player in a criminal enterprise that stretched beyond borders and victimized countless innocents. The fall of the Harrison family empire, once revered, was now complete, and Corey Harrison was at the very heart of its collapse. Now, he stands at the brink of facing the full force of justice. As the court proceedings began, the world got a glimpse into the deeply disturbing reality behind Corey Harrison's hidden life, one marred by serious criminal involvement that eventually led to the unraveling of his entire family legacy. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case, armed with a mountain of evidence that underscored just how deeply embedded Corey was in illegal dealings. From the very beginning, their argument was firm. Corey Harrison had not been a passive observer, but an active participant in a far-reaching criminal organization. According to the prosecutors, Corey deliberately engaged in unlawful operations, working hand-in-hand with organized crime groups. These activities had allegedly been going on in plain sight for years, concealed under the guise of a respectable family business. They outlined an array of illegal ventures he was allegedly a part of, from laundering large sums of money to the trafficking of stolen property. But the most devastating claim was Corey's alleged connection to human trafficking. To support these charges, they presented encrypted communications, financial records, and whistleblower testimony, alongside statements from law enforcement officers who worked the case. The prosecution portrayed Corey as a man deeply woven into the fabric of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. He had allegedly used his position within the family pawn business to cover up these activities, operating in the shadows while maintaining the image of a trustworthy businessman. Perhaps the most crucial testimony came from federal agents who had been directly involved in the investigation. They meticulously described how they followed the trail of illegal funds and contraband that ran through the Harrison family's establishment. These agents gave compelling accounts of how the store was used as a front for large-scale money laundering and illicit trade. Their words shed light on the extent to which Corey had gone to preserve and expand the business, even if it meant participating in serious crimes. Their revelations left the courtroom visibly stunned. But it didn't stop there. A former employee of the gold and silver pawn shop, who once had the Harrison family's trust, emerged as a key whistleblower. This individual offered a first-hand look into what really happened behind closed doors. He recounted seeing large, undocumented cash exchanges and odd interactions with suspicious clients, bringing in rare, high-value items. Over time, the strange patterns and unorthodox requests from both Corey and Rick Harrison became too alarming to ignore. Eventually, this employee reached out to the FBI and shared vital information that helped crack open the case. His testimony was pivotal in building the case against the Harrisons. On the other side of the courtroom, however, the defense appeared disorganized and ineffective. Their primary approach centered around questioning the integrity of the witnesses and trying to undermine the investigation itself. The defense's central claim was that Corey was unaware of the extent of the criminal activities and was, in fact, manipulated by his father. They suggested that Rick Harrison had orchestrated everything and simply used Corey as a pawn in his criminal empire. However, This strategy failed to hold water in the face of the damning and abundant evidence laid out by the prosecution. The defense's arguments could not stand against the digital records, testimonies, and witness accounts that told a much more incriminating story. As the trial pressed on, more shocking details about the operations within the Harrison family's business came to light. Prosecutors showed that Corey had not only communicated with known crime syndicates, but had also personally negotiated and facilitated illegal deals. Many of these transactions had been disguised as legitimate pawnshop business. It became increasingly evident that Corey was not just aware of these illegal acts, he had been orchestrating them. One of the trial's most crucial moments came when prosecutors presented a series of decrypted messages between Corey and a major criminal organization. These communications clearly laid out instructions for moving massive amounts of money and merchandise across state lines without drawing attention. The content of the messages left no doubt. Corey was not being manipulated. He was actively managing and coordinating these criminal efforts. The direct nature of these messages destroyed the defense's portrayal of Corey as a clueless or unwilling participant. Instead, the evidence showed a man fully engaged in the illicit operations, making decisions, issuing instructions, and maintaining relationships with underworld players. As the defense tried to shift blame onto Rick, they found themselves unable to gain traction. Their argument, that Rick was the true ringleader and that Corey had been emotionally manipulated, did not convince the jury. In fact, jurors seemed unconvinced by any attempt to divert attention away from Corey's clear involvement. Their expressions and questions signaled growing skepticism. The idea that Corey was merely a victim of his father's manipulation rang hollow in the face of the prosecution's airtight case. Public perception mirrored this sentiment. Media coverage of the trial exploded across the country. Reporters descended upon Las Vegas to cover what had become one of the most shocking scandals in reality TV history. Pawn Stars, once hailed as a wholesome, family-friendly show, was now under intense scrutiny. Fans who had admired Corey for his down-to-earth demeanor were crushed by the revelations. They struggled to reconcile the image of the funny, relatable guy on television with the man now accused of participating in organized crime and human trafficking. The trial had morphed into a real-world tragedy playing out in front of millions. When the prosecution concluded its case, the defense had little left in their arsenal. Their cross-examinations had failed to poke holes in the credibility of the federal agents or the whistleblower. Their efforts to frame Corey as a manipulated pawn simply didn't hold up under scrutiny. The courtroom was filled with a sense of finality as skepticism toward the defense's arguments settled in. The final stretch of the trial was tense and emotionally charged. Both legal teams prepared their closing remarks, understanding that every word could sway the jury one way or another. The prosecution's closing argument was powerful and impassioned. They reminded the jury of the gravity of Corey's crimes and the irreparable damage he had caused. They emphasized how he had betrayed the trust of a community, sullied his family's legacy, and directly contributed to the suffering of victims, especially those tied to human trafficking. Their final message was firm and unambiguous. Corey Harrison must answer for his actions. He had committed grave offenses, and justice had to prevail. As the jury retired to deliberate, the atmosphere inside the courtroom was thick with tension and anticipation. Clearly, Corey's destiny had been written in stone. He now stood at the heart of one of Las Vegas's most significant criminal trials in recent memory. The sheer magnitude of the evidence leveled against him left little room for doubt. The issue was no longer about determining guilt. It was now a question of what punishment the legal system would deem appropriate. A tense hush swept across the courtroom as the jury returned to announce their decision. After weeks of proceedings, hours of witness statements, and an overwhelming flood of documentation, the final reckoning had arrived. All eyes shifted toward Corey Harrison. At 41 years old, Corey Harrison, son of Rick Harrison, the well-known figure behind Pawn Stars, stood quietly at the defense table, his future hanging by a thread. Once embraced by the public for his easygoing charm and role in the famous pawnshop enterprise, he now awaited judgment for the crimes that had destroyed that image. As the jurors made their way to their seats, an oppressive silence consumed the room. Everyone present, especially the Harrison family seated nearby, braced for the announcement that would change the course of Corey's life forever. There was no turning back from this moment. The events that had unfolded over the past several weeks had now come to a dramatic crescendo. The presiding judge, a stern and composed figure who had guided the trial from the start, stood and addressed the courtroom. Her voice rang out clearly as she asked the jury to deliver their findings. Then came the moment that would forever be etched in the courtroom's memory. The court clerk declared, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Corey Harrison, guilty on all charges." The verdict echoed like a thunderclap. For a fleeting second, no one moved. Corey remained still, his face blank, though the gravity of the situation visibly affected him. His hands shook slightly, betraying the turmoil he felt. Everything that had happened, every allegation and detail uncovered, was now solidified as legal truth. His carefully crafted public persona had been demolished beyond repair. Following the announcement, the prosecution stood to deliver their final remarks on the gravity of Corey's offenses. The lead prosecutor, who had methodically built the case with surgical precision, began to outline the devastating repercussions of Corey's actions. This wasn't a case of mere association. The prosecutor emphasized that Corey was not an innocent bystander manipulated by others. He had taken an active role. The crimes listed included human trafficking, laundering illicit funds, and handling stolen property. He didn't merely look the other way. He coordinated these crimes and profited from them. His actions, the prosecutor stressed, had contributed to a deeply entrenched cycle of abuse, greed, and deception that lasted for years. The courtroom absorbed the weight of every word. Once a beloved television personality, Corey Harrison was now a man who had destroyed his own life and the lives of countless others. The trust the public had once placed in him was now completely shattered. The prosecutor's closing point was resolute. Justice had to be served. There could be no compassion or leniency in this case. On the opposite side of the courtroom, Corey's defense attorney sat motionless, knowing there were no further strategies to pursue. Every previous attempt to lessen Corey's responsibility had failed. The legal team had argued that Corey was drawn into the criminal operation by his father's manipulation, that he was a pawn in a larger scheme. But the prosecution's overwhelming evidence had dismantled that notion. The jury now understood that Corey was anything but passive. He had made conscious choices and participated with full awareness. As the courtroom settled, everyone turned their attention to Corey. This was his opportunity to address the court. Silence fell once again as he stepped forward. His lawyer whispered briefly to him, and then Corey began to speak. His voice was low, barely more than a whisper, his demeanor solemn. "I am truly sorry for what I've done," he said, his words heavy with regret. "I never wanted to harm anyone, but I know I have. I see that now." His voice quivered as he went on. "I wish I could go back and undo everything, but I know I can't. I have no excuses for what I did. I take full responsibility." As his eyes filled with emotion, he continued, "I've failed my family, disappointed my supporters, and betrayed everyone who ever believed in me." He paused before making one final heartbreaking statement. "I've let my father down, and that's a regret I'll carry for the rest of my life. I ask for mercy, but I understand I must be held accountable." His words hung in the silence that followed, haunting the room. Would this heartfelt apology be enough to soften the blow? Could remorse rewrite the legacy he had destroyed? These questions lingered without an answer. The judge, who had followed every word and nuance of the trial, finally addressed the court. She had heard all the arguments and reviewed every piece of evidence. With a calm but unwavering voice, she began her final judgment. "Corey Harrison," she began, "you have been found guilty of engaging in a sophisticated criminal operation. Your choices, and those of your associates, have inflicted lasting harm on individuals and the community." Her voice was firm and measured. "The public once admired you, but that admiration has been shattered beyond repair." She continued, "You were not a passive participant. You took deliberate actions in pursuit of personal profit, disregarding the law entirely." Then came the final declaration. "Because of the seriousness of your offenses and the damage you've caused, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The sentencing reverberated through the room like a final verdict on not just Corey's actions, but his entire legacy. A once celebrated figure on reality television was now condemned to spend the remainder of his life behind bars. There would be no return to the spotlight, no applause, only confinement and regret. The path he had once been proud to walk had now collapsed under the weight of his own decisions. As the judge spoke those final words, members of Corey's family, some seated in stunned silence, could hardly meet each other's eyes. Rick Harrison, the patriarch who had turned a simple pawn shop into a nationwide franchise, now sat helplessly as the empire he built unraveled. The courtroom was thick with disbelief and sorrow. No words could capture the pain and disappointment. The Harrison family, once seen as a symbol of American determination and family-driven success, now faced an irreversible fall from grace. The media, which had once adored and elevated them, now had a new headline, one that told the story of betrayal, crime, and downfall. The fall of Corey Harrison from a smiling TV star to a convicted felon was one of the most shocking narratives in television history. Devoted fans who had grown up watching his antics on screen were now struggling to reconcile the man they admired with the criminal standing in cuffs. As the courtroom gradually emptied, a heavy truth lingered in the air. An era had ended, not with celebration or fond farewells, but with disgrace, punishment, and irreversible consequences. The Harrison family, once celebrated as a shining example of the American dream, had now become a grim representation of disgrace and criminal downfall. Corey Harrison, who had once stood poised to inherit a thriving empire, now faced the grim reality of spending the rest of his life confined behind prison walls. His downfall served as a sobering lesson about the price one pays when ambition is fueled by corruption. His sentencing marked more than just a personal collapse. It symbolized a pivotal and tragic shift in the family's legacy. What had once been a television program showcasing entrepreneurial spirit and traditional values now stood at the heart of a nationally broadcast scandal. The cameras that once captured moments of success were now replaced with headlines of disgrace and betrayal. The impact of Corey's arrest and conviction struck a devastating blow to the Harrison family's public image. Years of carefully curated reputation disintegrated in a matter of days. The consequences extended well beyond the courtroom. They reached into the hearts of viewers who had admired the show for its portrayals of hard work, loyalty, and family ties. Fans who once admired Rick and Corey Harrison as the embodiment of grit and integrity now found themselves grappling with bitter disillusionment. It was difficult for them to reconcile the public personas with the dark truths that had come to light. The way the public viewed the Harrison name was forever changed. Corey's signature humor and charm, traits that had won over countless fans, were now stained by his involvement in a complex criminal network. Gone was the man who used to laugh with customers and strike deals on screen. In his place stood a cautionary tale about what happens when power is abused. His decisions not only ruined his life, but also struck a fatal blow to the empire his father had spent decades building. The repercussions for Rick Harrison were profound and personal. He wasn't just a businessman. He was the creator and face of Pawn Stars. For years, he had invited viewers into his world, sharing history and humor through the lens of a humble family business turned cultural phenomenon. But now that legacy had been severely compromised. Rick, the proud patriarch and self-made success story, had to face a heartbreaking reality. The son he trusted and raised had dismantled everything they had worked for. What was once a story of generational achievement was now tainted by deceit and criminality. Rick Harrison had not only lost a portion of his dignity, but also the legacy he had built from the ground up. He had become a beacon for dreamers and small business owners, a man who turned passion into prosperity. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop was more than a business. It was a symbol of connection, a place where history met family values. It was all captured on camera for millions to see. But now, the only things echoing through the shop were silence and regret. What once stood as a place of laughter and learning had been overtaken by scandal and sorrow. The Harrison family, once viewed as a tight-knit unit of success, now found themselves the focal point of one of the most shocking public scandals in recent memory. People began to question just how much Rick had known. Could he really have been unaware of what his son was involved in? Had he ignored signs or worse, turned a blind eye? As the investigation unfolded, critics and commentators raised doubts. Illegal activities had apparently been happening for years under his watch. The silence from Rick throughout the trial spoke volumes. He chose not to defend his son publicly, understanding the weight of the allegations. One misplaced comment could destroy what little reputation he still clung to. The ongoing FBI investigation cast a dark cloud over the entire Harrison family. Any move to soften Corey's image would have appeared as an attempt to cover up the truth, potentially dealing an even harsher blow to Rick's already damaged credibility. But silence offered no shield from scrutiny. The media dug deeper, journalists and analysts dissecting every angle. News reports, opinion pieces, and social media commentary picked apart the scandal, with Rick often at the center of public suspicion. Once upheld as a trustworthy, straight-shooting family man, Rick Harrison now found himself drowning under the weight of exposed lies. The family's image, one built on honesty and grit, had crumbled completely. What was thought to be unshakable was now completely undone. The consequences weren't just social or emotional, they were financial as well. The once booming business at the core of Pawn Stars now teetered on the edge of collapse. The program, once a ratings powerhouse, had become a shadow of itself, a reminder of what had been lost. Revelations from the FBI had erased the respect and loyalty once extended by viewers. Audiences could no longer distinguish between the antiques on television and the dark reality happening behind the scenes. The foundation of trust had been obliterated, putting the entire Harrison brand in serious jeopardy. Nobody wanted to support a venture associated with high-profile criminality. The pawn shop, long viewed as a symbol of American ingenuity and family enterprise, now found itself under relentless public scrutiny. Customers who once lined up to meet their TV heroes now walked past the store in discomfort or avoidance. Legal issues began to mount quickly. Financial probes, civil lawsuits, and demands for compensation loomed ominously. It became unclear whether the family would retain control of the business or be forced to sell in order to cover legal penalties. The possibility of victims seeking restitution or courts assigning liability for Corey's crimes created a storm of uncertainty. The road ahead looked increasingly bleak. For Corey's immediate family, the consequences were just as heartbreaking. The emotional weight of the trial proved almost too much to bear. His wife, who had stood by him throughout the ordeal, now had to accept the grim reality that her husband would never return home. In losing him to a life sentence, she was thrust into the harsh glare of media attention. She didn't just lose a partner, she was forced to carry a legacy forever tarnished by crime. Their children, too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, would one day grow up in the long shadow of a father remembered for infamy rather than fame. The once proud Harrison family was quietly coming undone, piece by painful piece. The media, insatiable in its pursuit of the story, did not let up in the days and weeks following the sentencing. Talk shows, podcasts, tabloid sites, and mainstream news programs dissected every new development. They analyzed the legal case, exposed damning evidence, and speculated on the psychological damage inflicted on those involved. What had begun as a courtroom drama had now spilled fully into popular culture. Pawn Stars wasn't just affected by the scandal, it had been consumed by it. The very institution that once elevated the Harrisons had now become their greatest burden, dragged into disgrace by the very individuals who built it. The future of the Harrison family now hangs in a delicate balance, uncertain and clouded by scandal. Rick, once heralded as the embodiment of entrepreneurial grit and a proud symbol of American perseverance, is now left grappling with the immense challenge of picking up the pieces. Rebuilding a reputation shattered so publicly is no small task. The business they built could be on the brink of closure, and assets once considered symbols of success may soon be liquidated. Yet perhaps the greatest obstacle lies in reclaiming the trust that has been so deeply broken. At the same time, Corey faces a grim fate, spending the rest of his life confined behind prison walls. For Rick and those closest to him, the ordeal is far from over. The emotional strain, financial damage, and public shame will echo long after the courtroom lights dim. As the dust began to settle and the family came to terms with Corey's fate, the public took a step back to examine the meteoric rise and dramatic downfall of what was once the Harrison Empire. From modest roots, they climbed to the summit of fame and wealth, a story that once inspired millions and epitomized the American dream. But lurking behind the flashing lights and scripted scenes was a much darker undercurrent. Hidden criminal behavior slowly eroded the foundation of everything they had built. When the truth finally surfaced, It brought the seemingly indestructible empire crashing down in mere moments. Corey Harrison's tale now serves as a sobering reminder. The pursuit of fame and wealth without boundaries can become a trap, and the consequences of criminal choices are ultimately unavoidable. The public reaction to Corey's downfall and the crumbling of his family's reputation ignited a media storm. For years, Pawn Stars had been more than just a show. It had become a weekly ritual for millions of viewers, inviting them into the fascinating world of antiques, haggling, and quirky storytelling. Fans felt they knew Rick and Corey, viewing them as authentic, grounded figures amidst the glitz of television. But the bombshell revelations surrounding the case shattered that illusion. What was once seen as genuine now felt like betrayal. Audiences struggled to reconcile the friendly on-screen persona with the disturbing realities exposed during the investigation. Initial reactions were filled with disbelief and emotional upheaval. Longtime fans were stunned that someone like Corey, who had entertained them for years with his humor and charm, could be entangled in something as heinous as money laundering and human trafficking. Online forums and social media platforms buzzed with confusion, speculation, and outrage. Some people clung to the hope that there had been a mistake, or that Corey had been falsely implicated in a wider conspiracy. A portion of the fan base remained loyal, waiting for a possible twist that would clear his name. But as the evidence piled up and the charges grew clearer, even those faithful supporters began to accept the painful truth. On the other hand, a large swath of the public reacted with harsh judgment. To them, Corey's actions weren't just illegal. They were a gross violation of the trust and admiration people had extended to him for years. The affection fans had once felt turned into seething anger. The notion that a man they had viewed as a savvy, relatable entrepreneur could be involved in exploiting vulnerable individuals sent waves of disgust throughout online communities. The moment details about the human trafficking charges emerged, outrage reached a boiling point. Social media feeds were consumed by condemnation, turning admiration into bitter resentment. What had once been a respected name now carried the stain of disgrace. The intense media coverage surrounding the trial and its aftermath transformed a lighthearted reality program into a cautionary tale of corruption. Pawn Stars, a show once known for its entertainment value, was now entangled in the dark world of criminal scandal. Viewers began to question the authenticity of everything they had once enjoyed. How much of the show was genuine? How much was scripted or manipulated for ratings? Suspicion replaced trust, and the bond between the audience and the Harrison family was fractured in ways that may never fully heal. Experts and media commentators were quick to add their voices to the conversation. Analysts in the entertainment industry expressed a shared sense of disappointment and disbelief. How could such deeply troubling behavior exist behind a program with such massive influence? Critics argued that the show glamorized the pawn industry while ignoring its darker realities. The carefully curated image of a tight-knit, hard-working family concealed a much grimmer truth. Some believed that behind the scenes was a system that preyed on the vulnerable for profit. The public was left disillusioned by the stark contrast between what had been portrayed on screen and the harsh reality that was now coming to light. What once captivated viewers, the thrill of unique discoveries, the humorous negotiations, and the eccentric customers, was now overshadowed by criminal revelations. The cheerful atmosphere of the shop was forever tainted. What had once been celebrated as a symbol of American ingenuity now stood as a warning of how quickly success can mask wrongdoing. Pawn Stars went from being an inspirational narrative about family and business to a lesson in the dangers of unchecked fame and misplaced trust. Regardless of whether the show survives, its legacy has been irreversibly altered. To some cultural critics, the Harrison scandal revealed something even deeper, the dark undercurrent that flows beneath reality television itself. It prompted serious conversations about how fame and television exposure can distort morality. The illegal actions that occurred under the Harrison family's roof raised uncomfortable questions about the responsibility of networks and producers. Were they complicit in ignoring red flags to protect their lucrative brand? Did the show's success blind executives to the behavior behind the scenes? Many now argue that the entertainment industry, in its relentless chase for ratings and ad revenue, often turns a blind eye to serious ethical issues, allowing personalities to flourish in the public eye, even as they commit grave offenses in private. For the Harrisons, the backlash was swift and overwhelming. It wasn't just their careers or reputation at stake. It was their personal lives that were under siege. Rick Harrison, once a beloved TV icon and seen as the moral leader of the family enterprise, suddenly found himself under intense scrutiny. Fans who had admired his work ethic and guidance began questioning whether he was truly unaware of the crimes taking place. Did Rick have knowledge of his son's actions? Had he chosen to stay silent, or was he truly blindsided? The lack of clear answers only deepened the public's suspicion and mistrust. Although Rick chose to remain largely silent during the media chaos, that silence became its own form of statement. As the patriarch, Rick was seen as the ethical compass of the family. Many felt he should have been aware of, or at least suspected, the illegal activities happening within the business he built from the ground up. Though he wasn't formally charged, his once pristine reputation was now stained. The fallout was brutal and unrelenting. Ultimately, the Harrison family scandal marks a profound turning point, not just for the individuals involved, but for the reality television industry as a whole. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of transparency, accountability, and ethics in a world where public figures are often elevated without sufficient scrutiny. Moving forward, these events will fuel broader debates about how media should responsibly represent those who wield influence on screen. Now, more than ever, there is a call for honesty behind the scenes and consequences for those who abuse their platforms. If you believe in truth and justice, help spread this story. Share the video, leave a comment, and be part of the conversation. Let's uncover the reality together. See you in the next video.